Welcome to the Piano Guys Piano Store comparison video of the models of the CLP line Clavinovas. Now, presumably you're here because you already watched the videos from the Piano Guys that talked about comparing CSP with CVP with CLP, and you're here because now you think you want a CLP, you're not sure which model you're interested in. That's the purpose of this video. I've got a spec sheet here. Every manufacturer, including Yamaha, created a spec sheet of all the models and all the features and all the step-ups that these models have. What a boring thing to read. My goal here is to bring this spec sheet to life. Now, before I get started, I should explain where I am. I'm standing in front of the Yamaha Piano Continuum back here. The Piano Continuum for Yamaha represents all of the piano types that Yamaha makes. Totally acoustic piano. Here you move a little to the right, you add some electronics. You can play this piano with some headphones, you add some speakers. If you move over here across the center line, you get over here with a digital piano. This piano doesn't have strings, but it still has an acoustic piano action. And then over here is what we're talking about today, the Clavinova line, fully digital. Let's continue talking about the CLP of the Clavinova line. Let's talk about the cabinets. You know, this is the first time I can remember in history where I've got the whole family together here, all of the CLPs, CLP 825, 835, 845, 875, 885. I've even got the two grand versions that are off camera that we'll bring back at the end of the video. What are the differences among the models? Well, let's start off by talking about the finishes, cabinet finishes. We've got represented here all of the cabinet finishes from the Clavinova line. Rosewood. Rosewood was the original Clavinova finish that was the most popular for years. Then Yamaha introduced matte black. This has actually overtaken rosewood and is very popular. Matte black. Over here is white birch. I actually don't think that that name represents really what it is. I consider this to be grayish. One of the big things in interior decorating is gray and beige together. I think this is sort of a grayish look. In fact, it matches the wood in this location. Just think of white birch as grayish. Over here, of course, is polished ebony. This is the classic finish of concert grand pianos. You can get this on any of these products here. And then this is a little new here too. This is polished white. When Steve Jobs introduced an iPod that was white, we saw the sale of white pianos increase at the same time. So it was sort of a new way and a new style of looking at things. Be sure to check the Piano Guys website for what models are available in what finish. Now let's talk about something that's sort of staring us right in the face. Look at the music racks. You know, it's funny. It wasn't until I actually got all of these together that even I noticed some of the differences. For example, in the 825, the music rack is almost the exact width of a music book when you put it up there. Same with the 835, notice there. But when you go to the 845, look at that, it doubles. So there's a difference in the size of the music racks. You've got the double size on the 875, and this is sort of unique. We'll talk about this. You've got the double size here in the 885. Another thing here that you may have noticed, no, these are not Wi-Fi antenna. These are music clips. Now, these music clips come in handy, especially when you put in a very large book. If you use the Piano Guys for Easy Piano, oh, that book pretty much stays open because it's sort of a smaller book, right? But what if you take a larger book, like the book that you get with every Clavinova in the owner's manual, the 50 classical music masterpieces? This is 250 pages. If you don't have the music clips up, look what happens. The book will close, and that's quite simply what these are. Music clips to hold larger books open. On the lower models, they're plastic. If you go up to the 845, you've got metal. You've got metal here. And even the 885 has its own unique version of music clips. By the way, here's something you can hang your hat on, literally. There's a headphone hanger under each one of these models. I don't recommend you put a hat on it, but if you take a pair of headphones, very conveniently, you can hang those headphones on that headphone hanger. It goes right there, and it just sort of keeps the headphones out of the way when you're not using them. All right, let's talk about the Fallboard. Some people call it a keyboard cover. You know, dust can get on those keys if you don't cover them up. And each Fallboard is a little bit different. The 825 slides out. The 835 also slides out, but it's a much more substantial keyboard cover. Same with the 845, 875. This one's unique though. Look at the 885. This not only has a keyboard cover, but it's got what we call a slow close Fallboard. This is just like our fine acoustic grand pianos, the U1. This is really a nice little look. And when you open it back up, then it exposes the music rack. Sort of a unique look for those instruments. Now let me cover something that's just a little more evident from where you're sitting right now. And let's just talk about the height of the instrument. The 825, you'll notice, is about this high. If you go to the 835, it's a little bit higher. 845 is exactly the same height, but it does have a different sound system. I'll talk about that in a moment. Go to the 875, a little higher. And you go to the 885 and a little bit higher. One unique benefit of this style, which I really like, is this is designed so that the Yamaha logo is down by the keys like a grand piano. And you can see reflections in the front Fallboard as you're playing. Now the size of the cabinet has a direct relationship with the sound system that goes into the instrument. So up to this point, we really talked about the look of the piano, all right? How it looked, the cabinet, the size, etc. Now we're switching over to the sound. This is very important. And a larger cabinet offers more speakers and more amplifiers to be added to the unit. So that's why the size of the instrument actually does have an impact on how it sounds, just like an acoustic piano. All right, let me get nerdy here for a little bit. Number of speakers. The 825 has 2 speakers mounted under the unit there. The 835 also has 2 speakers. However, you'll notice it's got a bigger cabinet size to enclose those speakers, so you get a little more low end. If we move to the 845, we actually double the number of speakers between the 835 and the 845. They look similar, right? But it has double the number of speakers, and we'll talk about the amplifier in a moment. Moving on over to the CLP 875, you add 2 additional speakers, plus a new speaker encasement under the piano here that you don't see over here on the 845. Plus those 2 extra speakers are quite unique in the sense that there's now a speaker cloth here in the front that's not over here. We do have a tonal escapement port here, but here's an actual speaker cloth. That's because there's a bi-directional horn in here that's shooting out the front, and I can also feel a speaker grate in the back. That same horn is shooting out the back. Plus, the mid-range has a 360 diffuser on it. This is really amazing. You're getting 360-degree sound. What's really unique is if I stand here while someone's playing, it sounds the same than if I stand behind the instrument while someone is playing because there's speakers in the back. Not necessarily true for the other models. And if you go to the 885, same number of speakers, but you get different types of speakers, including spruce cone speakers that are made out of the wood pulp from the soundboard that Yamaha makes. A speaker has a paper cone. They use the actual pulp from the soundboard material to make that cone. Just very clever on their part. Now, different size speakers also have to have different amplification for them. Larger speakers need more amplification. We're increasing the size of the speakers, and we're also increasing the number of the speakers. Just to get a little nerdy here again, 40 watts of power here for those 2 speakers. If we go to the 835, 60 watts of power for those 2 speakers in a little bigger cabinet. This is where you're going to see quite a difference. The 845 has 180 watts of power for those 2 additional speakers for a total of 4 speakers. 220 watts, 230 watts. Now before you tell me, Craig, I don't need that much power in the house. I spoke with a sound engineer, and the wattage is not just about amplification. It's more of a more balanced sound and a more dynamic range. When you increase the number of speakers and the size of the speakers, you have to increase the wattage. That's just a fact of life. And you also need what he called headroom. If you're playing at nice low volumes and you suddenly hit a chord hard, if you're up near the top of the limits of those speakers, you'll get distortion. You're not going to get distortion the way Yamaha has designed these systems. And by the way, this is why Yamaha went into home theater systems. They are designing speaker systems for the home so that they could what? So they could develop better sound systems for their musical instruments. Now you might be surprised that I'm not going to go through and play the piano sounds, the CFX in each one and the Bosendorfer in each one. Please watch the video on CLP so you can hear these wonderful pianos in action. All right, we talked about how they look. We talked about how they sound with the number of speakers and the sound system. Now let's talk about the action, how it feels. This is very important. First of all, regarding the key tops, they all have synthetic ivory and synthetic ebony key tops. The magic part about the material is they are somewhat porous in nature, so that if you're sweating even a little bit, it feels good on your hands. If they were just plastic keys, they wouldn't feel very good. They all have escapement. Escapement is what happens, pardon if I sound like a piano technician, which I'm not, when the jack slips off the knuckle in an acoustic piano. You push down the key and there's this little bump at the very end. They all have this escapement that I talk about in the CLP video. Feel that bump right there. What is different is the material inside the keys. These two instruments are hollow inside the keys. There's not solid plastic in there. It's a key with a hollow center. If you go to the 845, that's when you actually see real wood on the inside of the keys. And then, of course, that real wood continues up to the other models. Now, why do you need the wood on the inside of the keys? So important, because if it was hollow and I played two low A's in the CFX, you feel those vibrations coming up through your hand, primarily because that's a solid piece of wood between the sound system and your fingers. So that wood does serve a purpose. It also changes the inertia of the key as you're playing. Acoustic pianos have hammers, different size hammers for different size strings. If you've ever opened up the lid of a piano or looked inside a grand piano, those top strings are really skinny. The hammers that are hitting them are small. Those larger copper wound strings at the bottom are being hit by nice big hammers. The Clavinova has different size hammers too. The difference among the models, however, is starting with the 825, the 835, and the 845. They're graded in sections. A whole bunch of smaller hammers together up here, and then another set of little bigger hammers, another set of a little bigger hammers. They're grouped. But these two models, the 875 and the 885, have different size hammers starting from the top all the way down to the bottom, just like an acoustic piano. And only one model here has what we call counterweights, and that's in the 885, but also in the grand version of it, which we'll get to in a bit. What are counterweights for? Well, at a very basic level, in high-end digital pianos, counterweights allow you to play softly with more control. That's really the best way of looking at it. Remember I said there were different size hammers? Well, if you get down here and you've got those big hammers, imagine a key, which is like a seesaw, you having to move that big hammer. Now, that's like having a 200-pound person here with a 100-pound person here on a seesaw. If you add another 100 pounds over here, it makes it a lot easier to move, a lot easier to control. Only the 885 and the grand version of that model have those very special counterweights. Continuing our discussion with how this piano feels, well, we have to talk about our feet too. Clavinovas have 3 pedals on all of them, just like an acoustic piano, of course. And the dampers are what we call continuous controllers. It's not simply on and off. So all of them have continuous controllers in that sense, but only the top 2 models actually have what we call GP response. And that means when I push down that damper pedal, it's easy to move it first, and then, oh, it feels a little harder to play there. That's because it's simulating lifting the dampers in an acoustic piano. And then once they've lifted, it's a lot easier to move. Think of it as a variable resistance pedal. And under the category of feeling, let's talk about the actual user interface, how you interact with the piano, or as the spec sheet says, the control panel. If you look at an 825, there's only a couple of buttons on the control panel. And in order to select different sounds, they use the keys of the instrument to select the sounds. So you would hold down voice, and then I could select certain keys to get, say, a harpsichord or a string or something like that. The only issue with that is you don't know necessarily which voice you're selecting on an 825. But on an 835, in the control panel, they introduce an LCD screen where I can actually see the name of the voice right in the screen. In fact, all of the models up from the 825 have an LCD screen, so you can see exactly what it is you're selecting. However, you'll notice down here I've got physical buttons in the 835, physical buttons in the 845. Well, I've got touch sensors in the 875 and the 8A5. And what's clever about this is the control panel disappears unless you touch, and all of a sudden it appears, it backlights, you can make your selection, and after a certain amount of time that you can adjust, it then disappears. Why is that cool? When it disappears, it looks like a regular cheek block. Acoustic pianos have usually a small cheek block in the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side, a larger cheek block, because in those pianos, those bass strings extend a little farther in there to get a longer string length. So that's why this cheek block's a little bigger than that side, and look at that. It just disappeared. So if you're walking by it, wow, looks like an acoustic piano. So far we've talked about the differences in how the instruments look in terms of their cabinet. We've talked about the difference in the tone as a result of the number of speakers and the sound system. Then we talked about how these instruments feel differently based upon the touch of the action, the feel of the pedals, and even the control panel. Surprisingly, the actual functions of all these instruments is almost identical, with the exception of the 825. What do I mean by that? Well, when you go into the control panel and you hit function, you see the same choices there. That's why you should watch the Piano Guys CLP video again to find out what some of those functions are. They all have the same number of songs, 303 built-in lessons, 50 songs with the 50 classical music masterpieces with all of them, and there's difference in the number of voices. These center models all have 38 voices. Wow, the 885 has 53 voices plus 480 XG sounds, so it's like the ultimate. And then the 825 has 10 voices that are built in. So I can't wait, once you receive your CLP, to sit down on the bench and, oh, I just realized I haven't talked about the bench. All of these models have the same bench. It's called the BC 108. You know that overseas, Clavinovas don't come with benches. Here in the United States, they do come with benches until you get to the CLP 885 and the Grand version, which is a larger bench that actually opens up traditionally with music storage. Now, as promised, through the magic of video, I wanted to show you the Grand versions of two of these models. Which ones of these come in Grand versions? Let's find out. Welcome the CLP 865 GP, which is a Grand version of the CLP 835, functionally, electronically the same, except for the sound system. Different size speakers, different amplifier to go along with the larger cabinet. And over here, the CLP 895 GP. This is a Grand version of the amazing CLP 885. So referring to this spec sheet, remember I said it's the sound system that's different? Electronically very similar. The 835 has 2 speakers, but this has 4 speakers with 160 watts of power. And the 895 GP has the same number of speakers, but it's got 270 watts of power, 40 more than the 885. Now there's a very important last few points I want to make, and that has to do with a new app that Yamaha came up with. It's called Smart Pianist. Do you know this app is free, and it works with all of these products? What does it do? I can't go through all the features now. We have a separate video for that. But suffice to say, it brings the interface to life with color pictures, ease of operation to add different sections. Do you know that you can import a PDF into here a regular sheet music PDF, it'll evaluate the dots on the page and create MIDI files and accompaniments that you can play along with nothing but those dots on a page. It'll even evaluate the audio in your iPhone or your iPad or your Droid device and create chords from that audio so you can play along with some of your favorite music. And remember that 50 greats I talked about? They're available in PDF form with the accompaniments already in this app. And since we're talking about sheet music, I got to tell you about this book, The Piano Guys for Easy Piano. If you want to play Piano Guys music, some of the 15 most popular arrangements, these are expertly arranged by a gentleman named Philip Kevrin. They're technically early intermediate, but anyone can play from beginner to advanced. It's a wonderful way to learn how to actually play Piano Guys music. Be sure you talk to the Piano Guys piano store about that. And finally, let me tell you about a little special project that I just finished for the Piano Guys called the 28 Hidden CLP Clavinova Secrets that you didn't know existed. I used to get those types of things from my iPhone where it said, did you know you could do this? Did you know you could do this? And you go, wow, I had no idea. That's exactly what we did for the CLP Clavinova. Be sure you talk to the Piano Guys piano store about getting your list of those secrets. Well, I hope this little video helped you decide which model CLP Clavinova is right for you. If you have any additional questions, be sure to call the Piano Guys piano store at 866-75-PIANO. Thanks for listening.